Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session on infographics. Just because we're at the top of the hour, there are probably going to be a couple people filtering in and out as we get going. But in the interest of time, I'm just going to get us started. So our session today is part of, slide. Our session today is part of the Skills for Research Impact series, which is jointly presented by the Ontario Agri-Food Alliance, the Community Engaged Scholarship Institute, and the Research Innovation Office at the University of Guelph. You can find out more info about the program at the URL at the top there, uoguel.ph/research-impact. And we're always open to more topic suggestions. So if there's anything you'd like to see us cover, let us know. And I always like to start with a land acknowledgement, and I find that they're more engaging when I'm learning something. So if you'll humor me for just a moment, I'd like to talk to you about the dish with one spoon wampum. So as we all know, everything that we now call Canada is steeped in Indigenous history and home to many past, present, and future First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. The University of Guelph specifically occupies land encompassed by the Between the Lakes Treaty, which is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit Anishinaabe Nation. And the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement covers areas that we now call Southern Ontario, parts of Quebec, Upper Michigan, and New York states. And it's been practiced since at least 1142 CE. And this agreement outlines the shared responsibilities that we all have to this land and to each other. So by imagining this land and its resources as a single dish from which we all share, we have responsibilities to keep the dish clean, take only what we need, and to share equitably with others, and to treat each other respectfully, honestly, with kindness, and in the spirit of peace. Unfortunately, Canadian history is often a poor representation of these teachings, and we fail to keep these promises in many ways. But the path forward must begin with telling these truths as they are and committing to taking action to ensure that this legacy of injustice does not continue. And so to truly honor and respect this land, we must hold systems of power accountable and be critical of inequity when we see it. And I say this as someone descended from immigrants and refugees who were only lucky enough to call this land home because of the systematic disenfranchisement of so many others. So wherever you are in the world joining us from today, I would encourage you to learn more about the history of your region and its original communities. Nativeland.ca is one of many excellent resources to learn more. So with that, getting into how today's session is going to work, feel free to use the chat box at any time during the presentation if you have any questions or comments. There's also going to be some opportunities, especially at the end of the session today, to unmute and ask questions for a more interactive Q&A style. We are recording today's session, and we're going to send the link out to everyone who registers. We may also post the video publicly on our YouTube channel, just because there's so much interest in today's session in particular. There is captioning available if you would like. Just go through the more options within Teams, find the captions options there. And we're also going to send out a copy of the slides and some additional resources afterwards to everyone who registers. And please also complete the evaluation survey that we'll be sending out just to let us know how today went and the things you'd like to see covered more in the future. And so with that, I'm going to turn things over to our wonderful speakers today. Alex Sawatsky is the creative advisor at the Arrow Food Institute, and Hope Jesmer is a master's student as well as a research assistant currently working on some knowledge mobilization projects with Food from Thought. So with that, I will turn things over.
Thank you so much, Valerie, and Hope and I are delighted to be here today and talk all about knowledge mobilization, specifically infographics as knowledge mobilization tools. So I will share my screen. And we'll get started. So thank you for the warm welcome, Valerie, and welcome to everyone else as well. Thank you for being here and taking the time to be with us. And Valerie, thank you for that great land acknowledgement as well. I think it's so important to start with that at the beginning of any sort of presentation, especially ones where we're talking about knowledge. I want to take a moment to think a little bit more about where we're all coming from and how we think about knowledge, how we think about how we think. How is our knowledge created? How do we shape it? How do we share it? It's important, I think, especially in the realm of knowledge mobilization, to recognize that our knowledge is created and shaped in relationship, and that it involves relationships to places, to people, and especially to the information that we're sharing from certain places with certain people. And much like land acknowledgements and understanding our place on the lands that we're from and or our guests on, knowledge is dynamic as well and evolves with these understandings of who we are, how we know, what we know. So hello. In terms of situating myself and where I'm coming from, I'm speaking with you all from what is now known as Guelph, as Valerie introduced, situated within the dish with one spoon wampum. And in relation to all of you, I would position myself as very much a learner still in this space of knowledge mobilization and design. Everything I've learned about knowledge mobilization and infographics, I've learned by doing. And I've learned by doing and engaging it with others in similar spaces to this. Um, I have a PhD in public health, and that was where my interest and passion for knowledge mobilization developed. I did my graduate research in partnership with an Inuit community in Labrador, and knowledge mobilization became a central tool for understanding not only communicating the research, but also to building relationships among the research team. And now, currently, one of my roles is as creative advisor with the Aral Food Institute, and I essentially serve as a form of artist in residence in a way with the team at AFI, working with the different aspects of our programming and policy to think about how to convey and share information creatively, differently, and effectively. Hope, I will turn it over to you now to introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I got kind of nervous seeing how many people there are now. Wasn't expecting so many, but I'm Hope, she, her pronouns. I'm also very much a learner in this, given that I learn a lot from Alex and Rosemary and the Food from Thought team as I'm getting the chance to work on infographics more in my role there. I'm a knowledge mobilization assistant, so I write things and I draw things about the very cool research that happens at Food from Thought and try to make it accessible with what I write or draw. And aside from that, I'm a graduate student in geography, studying in a very similar realm as what Food from Thought works on. So yeah, I guess I'm here in those two hats, and I'm also here as sort of to represent the grad student perspective in making infographics for those of you who are grad students here. And I guess I also wear the hat of artist on the side who enjoys getting to use it in her work when she can.
Thanks so much, Hope. And then for folks online, I encourage you to share if you'd like in the chat about who you are, what you do, where you're coming from, just so you can all get a sense of who's all here with you. As you're doing that, I will move into talking and just introducing the workshop itself. So as Valerie mentioned, this workshop series is a collaboration between the Ontario Agri-Food Innovation Alliance, the Community Engaged Scholarship Institute, and the Research Innovation Office at the University of Guelph. And we're excited about this workshop in particular. We've designed it to support an infographic/research visualization program developed through a collaboration between all these lovely partners below, the Alliance, the Research and Innovation Office, Food from Thought, as well as the Aral Food Institute. So, as I mentioned, as both Hope and I mentioned, we're both very much learners as well. And we're just going to be sharing some promising practices that we've gathered to date for designing and engaging and visually appealing infographics. These are all based on our own experiences, as well as drawing a lot from previous workshops facilitated by Valerie. So thank you, Valerie. I'll be shouting out thank yous throughout this presentation. In terms of our specific objectives, we're going to start by describing some of the basic principles of visual design in the context of knowledge mobilization, and then move into understanding some key strategies for identifying messages and audiences when designing infographics. Understand some criteria for assessing an infographic's effectiveness, what makes it work, what makes it not work so well. And then finally move into talking about how we select and apply appropriate design tools and resources to develop a basic infographic. In terms of how this presentation will flow, we'll start with that overview of knowledge mobilization principles, talk about infographics as knowledge mobilization tools, identify key messages, identify target audiences, move into some examples, and then at the end we'll share some resources that will be provided in the slides that are shared with you afterwards as well. So before we dive into the overview of infographics and knowledge mobilization, what comes to mind when you think of infographics or visual design? And please write in the chat if you're comfortable, just a word association activity. What do you think of when you think of infographics?
I'm going to add some too.
These are all great. Clarity, less text. Amazing. Continue this activity. Continue to associate all these things with your knowledge of infographics. How about knowledge mobilization? Might be some similar words in there, but what comes to mind and what are your experiences, I guess, with knowledge mobilization? Oop. Take that away. These are all wonderful. I can tell a lot of people have experience already in knowledge mobilization and infographics, and also want to emphasize that even if you don't, this is hopefully still going to be a very helpful workshop. And even if you do, hopefully there will be stuff that you learn and can share with us throughout this presentation. Broadly, knowledge mobilization is a term that's often used when we talk about impact. It describes all the things that we as knowledge mobilizers do to get knowledge into the hands of the right people to create solutions to a problem. And if you've ever found yourself in the position of needing to share information with others so that they can make an informed decision, that's considered knowledge mobilization, in my opinion. So I think we all have experience in doing this. It's a fancy term for a fairly standard practice in that way. So in the simpler term, you can think of it as sharing information with people in a way that they'll be able to understand and apply it. And by getting that information to people in a way that's easy for them to use and apply, they can hopefully transform that knowledge that you've then shared with them into an action or a decision. There's no standard definition or way to do it. It's an umbrella term that covers many activities such as communication, dissemination, partnership building, community engagement, and more, many of which, if you've been attending this workshop series, will have already been covered. The best strategy and methods for knowledge mobilization will depend on your audience and your goals. So there are many different definitions and tools at your disposal, but at the end of the day, it's all about focusing on how you can create impact by sharing knowledge. With this framing, I'm hoping that you can start to understand infographics in particular, not just as pretty graphic designs that only those with experience and skills in design can do. Infographics are knowledge mobilization tools, and creating an infographic involves adding meaning to data and presenting that information in an engaging way. So it's not just about the design. The design component relies on your ability to process and add meaning and context to the data and information you're sharing. So that's regardless of what your skill level is or what you feel your skill level is in design, focusing on how you understand knowledge and how you want to share knowledge, that's the heart of it. That's the heart of the design of infographics. And the way you process that data and present it in an infographic will depend on your audience, their needs, and your communication goals. Essentially, data is your starting point. Data involves words, images, numbers, events, specific facts. It's raw, there's often no context, and no work has been done to identify patterns. But by processing data, we get to information. And information it serves a purpose. It has meaning. It answers questions such as who, what, where, how many, etc. It provides context and framing for the data, so it's giving a little bit of a framework for how to understand the numbers, the words, that raw information, or that raw data, sorry. And then by processing information, that's how we land at knowledge. Contextualized learning, reasoning, and understandings that helps to build relationships, and it's that knowledge that will inform decision-making and actions. So here, another big thank you to Valerie. I loved this visual representation from one of your previous slides. It involves thinking about data as a pile of unsorted Lego bricks, and it's not your job to figure out what to do with them. It doesn't really mean anything. But if someone sorts it for you, arranges it, or builds the Lego structure for you, you can start to appreciate what those individual bricks are without having to invest any additional effort of your own. And that's essentially what infographics do. They are the fully built Lego structure that takes the individual bricks and presents it in an engaging and impactful way. But specifically, now we've talked a little bit about knowledge mobilization, data processing, information, all of that. What are infographics and why are they so effective? Many people are visual learners. Many people are also very busy. Not lazy, just very busy. And there's lots of things happening all the time. Lots of streams of, we're getting our information from many different sources at all hours of the day. And things are competing for our attention, and distraction happens a lot. Infographics are a way to make processing that information stream easier by working with familiar things that our brains can understand and prefer and use to act on. So especially when you were talking about trying to change a behavior or inspire an action, it's a really big ask to have someone just change their opinion based on a pile of Lego. You don't want to make it harder for them by just giving them that pile of data or making them read an essay or something like that. What can we do to set people up really well to make a decision? There are two main components, many components, but two main ones of infographics. It's that informative piece, the info, and the visually engaging piece, the graphic. Infographics tend to be simplified forms of information, not very technically detailed, but also not dumbed down. Making an infographic and synthesizing and simplifying information is not the same as dumbing information down. You want your audience to feel informed, not condescended to or confused. And in this way, there's often many details that are missing from an infographic, and so they're often supplemented by other materials or an extension of a project, such as a report, a website, a social media campaign, etc. It's a tool as part of a larger toolkit for mobilizing knowledge. Infographics do that work of processing data into information and knowledge that people can use and act on. They're a helpful tool for facilitating engagement and encouraging people to think differently and from a different vantage point when learning and absorbing information. And I'll just pause here to say, like, I often think about that as like your external audience, your target audience that you want to inspire to think differently or change an opinion or an action. But it also happens when you're working with collaborators too. In the projects I've worked on, even the researchers who have been immersed in a research project and have presented me with the research that they would like mobilized, once we go through this process of creating, if it's an infographic and I share it back with them, they often can see new patterns, ideas, information, and engage with the material in a different way, even though they're the ones who've generated it themselves. So both internally and externally, infographics are really helpful for those different vantage points. I also like to think of infographics as tools for telling visual stories. I come from a background of qualitative research premised on storytelling. So just for me, it's helpful when I'm approaching a project to think about how I'm going to tell a story instead of how I'm going to visualize the data. It's just a mind game that I play with myself. So developing infographics, as with any form of storytelling, for me is easier and more effective when it's premised on strong relationships. And that involves both relationships with the material itself, so getting acquainted with it, playing around with it in different ways to understand it. And then also relationships with partners and collaborators, those that I'm telling the story with. And then the audience as well, the relationship with the audience, those that I'm telling the story to. So again, that's a mind game for me to play as I'm developing an infographic. Some examples of infographics as knowledge mobilization tools, as visual storytelling tools, and how they can be powerful is first, synthesizing large amounts of information. You don't want your story to be boring and include too much information. And this is an example of an infographic I developed from a graphic recording of a session for the Canadian Nutrition Society conference in 2021. And this was from a presentation by Heidi Smith, who's a registered dietitian. And she spoke about mindfulness-based stress reduction in diabetes. Shared a lot of information that I was not familiar with previous to this presentation on risk reduction in diabetes and how mindfulness-based approaches can help to mitigate or address that. It was a lot of information, really helpful, but how do we want to organize it? What's the action? What's the main message here? So I worked to organize it into main themes. So starting with mindfulness and diabetes, and then how to learn and respond to stimuli rather than react and why that's important. And then all under the overarching theme of we're thinking about the mind-body connection when it comes to health. And that was the central component, central message, and then all of the information was organized under that. Another example of the power of infographics as storytelling, as knowledge mobilization tools, is that they can help to communicate intangible concepts as well. So using imagery that resonates with cultural practices and values, that that's where an infographic or a visual tool can come in handy. This is an infographic I did for the Nunavik Regional Board of Health and Social Services, meant to communicate key concepts of health and well-being in Nunavik that are premised on the foundation of language and culture. So this is like the social determinants of health that many of us are familiar with in a Western context, but tailored specifically to an Inuit context in Nunavik and premised on Inuit values and practices. So the research team did community consultations and engagement to identify 8 key themes related to what is needed for health and wellness. And then I worked with the research team to present those themes as a series of interconnected health determinants that are relevant to community levels of experience. And in this case, it was berry picking. So this is a bake apple, or in other Nordic regions, it's identified as a cloudberry. And it shows it's growing from the foundation of culture and language, and all of the key themes of health and well-being are housed within that berry. We also did a French version and an Inuktitut version as well to make sure it was as useful and accessible as possible to the different audience groups. And Hope, I'd like to turn over to you to share your example.
Yes, I have 2. This first one is demonstrating an infographic that's used to describe a process. You might not be able to read the slides, but basically we had the overall subject was a really important body of research that describes how avian influenza, or bird flu, as you might know it, spreads between species, whether it's fowl, livestock, even humans. And sometimes those paths crossed over and whatnot. So we wanted to illustrate how those are all interconnected, and also what might be done at different steps to mitigate, to mitigate that spread. And I guess a process could be anything. It could be something, how something spreads, how something changes through time, how something works if you have something quite technical. I think this is a really fun and also a simple starting spot for developing an infographic. And the other thing I wanted to mention about this slide was,
Sorry.
oh no, And the last thing I wanted to mention is the imagery we finally landed on was like a water metaphor, because we were finding that we had these puzzle pieces, but we couldn't tie it together, and building roads behind all these animals looked terrible. But we found that we kept describing the flow of influenza, or avian influenza, in terms of water. And so we were like, okay, the language that we're using naturally to talk about this subject is giving us a hint about what might translate well to a graphic. So that's what we came up with here. I like that one. Okay, you can go to the other one. And then this one, in contrast to an infographic that describes a process, this one is describing a set of related ideas. So it's not that if you read this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it's going to explain how anything works, but it is giving you 6 points that describes how prioritizing productivity destabilizes global food systems. And again, that's a matter of coming up. I'll restart my sentence. This was trying to synthesize a lot of ideas coming from a really cool research article that was recently published by one of our Food from Thought scholars. And so we were trying to tell a few different stories from things that were in that paper, but in the end, this is what we decided to tell with that. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Hope. So hopefully, or maybe, this is something that many of you will be familiar with or have seen before. It's an overview of the Skills for Research Impact series, knowledge mobilization, components of effective knowledge mobilization in particular. The workshops previous and following this will focus on the what, the why, the who, the how, and the evaluation of knowledge mobilization. So for example, today, Hope and I are giving a presentation, and that's our how, that's our method, because we know you as a group of interested individuals with varying levels of experience and interest in knowledge mobilization, who, that's audience, want to learn about infographics, the what, and because you're either interested in creating them or participating in the Infographics in Practice workshop. And as Valerie mentioned at the very beginning, hopefully you will also evaluate and let us know what we can improve for the next time we do this. Today, we're going to focus specifically on the what and the who. So the key is as it relates to infographics, just to hone our message in, because we want to keep this as relevant as possible for you and in developing an infographic. The what will be strategies for identifying key messages, and the who will be strategies for identifying target audiences, and then the how will be creating those infographics at the end. So first, we'll start with discussing key messages and how to identify them, why they're important. Key messages, it's important to make it obvious at the very outset, understandable from the title or key headings in an infographic. Relatedly, less is more for key messages. You want to resist the urge to have too many, because that can kind of muddy the waters in terms of what people feel they're supposed to do or feel after experiencing or engaging with an infographic. A key message should help to emphasize why someone should care about it. It should have some relevance or weight in that respect. It should also prioritize calls to action over fun facts. So things like, here's what you need to do, or steps for, or your questions about such and such answered. Facts are interesting and fun, but unlikely to motivate someone to make a decision or change any sort of behavior. These calls to action should not be premised on shame or blame, so avoiding everything you know about this is wrong types of statements is a good way to go. You don't want to capitalize on or take advantage of people's vulnerabilities and come from a place of like, here's what you lack in knowledge. Rather not, we should be approaching from a strengths-based approach and using what we can to inform and inspire further thinking about a topic. In terms of strategies for identifying key messages, I'm just going to share a little bit about what I typically do. I just ask guiding questions, and that's my standard approach. If I'm working in collaboration or in partnership, or the information I'm mobilizing is not from me or my own, I'll start with having a discussion around the story of the research or topic. So this is just asking questions like, why did you, collaborator, pursue this topic? Why is it important? What was the initial state or context of the situation prior to you doing this work? What was the problem you were looking to solve? And then how did you solve that problem? Or what has changed since you started doing this work, if the problem wasn't solved? And then ultimately, what did you learn? What do you feel like is important for others to learn from this experience? And then based on those answers to those questions, I'll start to really clarify what that key message should be. And if I'm working on my own, or if I'm mobilizing knowledge that is from work that I've done, I ask myself those same questions, and I write them down because it's really helpful to at least have like a tangible starting place and just start to organize my thoughts. Hope, did you have any, I know we didn't plan on this, but do you have any additional strategies or questions that you ask yourself or others when identifying key messages?
I think you had a really important one. Maybe a small one that I would add is, if you're, aside from that conversation, which I think is the most important, you're doing some brainstorming on your own end, and maybe just kind of brain dumping a few options is a helpful exercise in seeing what sticks, what is verbalized easy, what story is told easy, and that kind of guides you in what you should be pursuing or not. If you want to do this one, but it's really super sticky, it's really messy to work with, maybe something that's naturally more easy is, kind of the message you should be telling. Yeah.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Yeah, feeling like you don't want to do it all, reminding yourself that you don't have to capture every single possible thing within the story. Next, let's talk about target audiences. Key messages and target audiences are inherently interconnected. Your key message will hinge on your target audience and vice versa. Your target audience is a group of people that can benefit from and or act on the knowledge that you're sharing. They should care about its importance, and it's your job to convey that sort of level of care or inspire that level of care. There we go. It's also important to be as specific as possible when communicating and sharing knowledge with target audiences. Details can help and thus help you be more effective in your communication. And this was a line, again, from Valerie's previous workshops, but everyone also means no one in particular. So that's why it's really important to identify a target audience and really hone your key message. The way you design and communicate knowledge through an infographic will vary depending on your audience. Different people will have different levels of familiarity with the material and different abilities to act on the knowledge that you're sharing. So that will shape your message. So as you know, we will touch on later, and as we've kind of touched on leading up to this point, sometimes just considering multiple strategies or multiple infographics is a better way to go, rather than trying to combine everything into one key knowledge mobilization tool. So if you have multiple audiences, considering multiple infographics or different types of knowledge mobilization strategies can likely be the better way to go. And it's also a little bit easier when you're then going to design an infographic, because you're not trying to do everything. Some additional strategies that can help you design an infographic that resonates with your target audience include asking questions like, what do they already know and what do they need to know? You don't want to be redundant, and if your audience already has a baseline understanding of a certain topic, then you maybe don't need to include a section that introduces the topic. So that, like, those are considerations for the larger design. Similarly, what messaging and vocabulary are most effective and appropriate. Jargon is typically discouraged, but if your specific audience is familiar with a certain term or way of understanding something, then drawing on that knowledge is a helpful tool and trick for connecting and making your information as relatable as possible. Also asking what some potential barriers might be for folks in accessing the knowledge, or that might affect how they understand it. And those include physical as well as more intangible barriers as well, which we can move into discussing in more detail as we're talking about the nitty-gritties of infographics later on. This may go without saying, but it's worth saying. Different audiences have different needs. And this is really essential for good storytelling and knowledge mobilization strategies. Getting to know your audience, getting to build relationships with them, and building your story based on those relationships is how I approach design in general for knowledge mobilization. For example, this was an infographic I did with some colleagues who are working on a chapter for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, so IPCC, one of their reports. And this was specifically related to risks to mental health and well-being from climate change in the circumpolar north. And this propeller concept is a familiar diagram to many of those who are part of the IPCC or familiar with the IPCC's work. So, but conversely, mental health for a predominantly natural scientist group of folks, it was not a familiar concept. So taking a familiar visual and presenting information in that way is kind of a pathway in to generating that understanding to that more unfamiliar topic to help it make it more relatable and show that you're trying to identify with your audience. Also, in terms of audience needs, sometimes the need is just organizing the information differently. This is an example of a directory of wellness programs and services that I did with the Chippewas of Nawash unceded First Nation. They developed a directory of wellness programs and services, but wanted to present it in a poster format that could be displayed in offices around town, and also in a way that reflected the way they typically search for and recommend programs and services to clients. So they landed on the generational sort of way of organizing. So we played around with the concept of a tree and tree rings, and organized the programs into children and youth, adults, seniors and elders, and then community-wide. And this meant that some of the programs and services were duplicated across the many different groups of generations, but that was okay because that was how they searched for the information. And they also wanted to easily identify the themes that were involved within each program or service. So that was where the icons at the bottom at the legend came into play, where you could look at the family well-being program and see that, okay, it's a service and program provision. It focuses on land-based programming, involves support for caregivers and preventative healthcare, and also prioritizes cultural well-being. And so it's a quick way to reference. And then also there was a full booklet that we developed that had the more detailed information in terms of what that program was about. And Hope, I'll turn it over to you in terms of choosing the right story to tell.
I just want to say the last graphic is, every time I see it, I'm like, wow, that's so awesome. Good job on that one. Yes. For this slide, I brought back the same graphic. I guess you could show the whole slide, it's okay. The same graphic that I just showed an example was, just because when you asked about balancing needs, this was first thing that came to mind for me is this graphic. So again, it was an infographic that was developed related to a paper that was published, but it wasn't an infographic that's embedded in that research article. It was actually tied to a food from thought article about the research that happened. So it was sort of balancing the needs of writing something that helps somebody understand the paper better, but also something that can be appealing to someone who's not part of who actually didn't choose to read the paper, but maybe saw the article. And so we had the first option that we ended up not going with, but where we wanted to draw something that was maybe a key concept in the paper, and it sort of vernacularizes expert knowledge into something that would help you understand the paper better, which would be great, but then it's not super helpful to the rest of Food from Thought's audience who might read that and who would benefit from it, but maybe just wanted a synthesis or a summary of what the paper was. So it's sort of knowing that I'm not just making something for the researcher, I'm also making something for Food from Thought. And like we said, something that's more action-oriented, not just a fun fact about ecological concepts, which might be interesting to the readers, but isn't super applicable to the widest audience possible. So that's why I think this is something to consider.
I love it. Thank you, Hope. Before we move into processes and how to get started, I just want to pause for a couple minutes and let you either take a break, stand up, walk around, or if you're already thinking about an infographic theme or topic for the Infographics in Practice program, or just for your work in general, take a moment and write down some ideas around who your target audience might be, and relatedly either what your key message will be or what questions you will ask to get to that key message. So yeah, I'll just give maybe 2 minutes to either, walk around, stand up, or write down some ideas, or both. And then we'll move back into getting started with telling visual stories with infographics. All right, so if you've wandered away, please come back and join us. Whatever ideas that you've started writing down or thinking about, keep them either in a spot in your brain that is accessible or around you that is accessible, and continue to revisit it as you're developing your infographics or any other knowledge mobilization tools. So back to the presentation. In terms of getting started telling visual stories with infographics, Hope and I thought we'd share a little bit about our individual processes, which actually have a lot of crossover. And not to say that this is the process or processes that you should follow, but to help you get started thinking about what your process might look like. So for me, I usually, as I mentioned briefly earlier, get started gathering background materials and context. And I should preface this with, this is when I'm dealing with information that is not information that I have necessarily gathered. It is, I'm working with a collaborator who has done the research, and I am then collaborating with them to share it. So gathering that background info, meet with collaborators. I ask questions and identify goals. So similar to that slide earlier where asking those key questions about identifying a message, that's where I bring those questions in and have a conversation about it. From there, I develop the story or the potential story, create a rough sketch of it. Before I even look at any design tools, I stick to pen and paper and I just sketch it out. I let myself be messy. I think for me, that's really important because I can get really caught up with how something looks versus what it's supposed to convey. And for getting feedback, it's really important to focus on, is the story right? Is the message right? Before getting into details around like, I don't like that font, I don't like that color. That can all be done later on. But what matters most is that heart of the story, of the message. So yeah, starting with very, very simple, rough sketches. This also helps with, I've found kind of lifting that curtain behind the design process and inviting people in to see what your process is so that you're not just producing like fancy design right away, because as anyone who has worked on a design or even just writing a paper, which I'm sure many of you have done, you don't start with the final version at all. Like you start with many, many drafts and visuals included for me. I then share those sketches, that concept, and ask for feedback. I usually try to ask specific questions rather than, what do you think? Asking things like, does this message resonate with what our conversation involved? Is there something missing? Would you add anything else? Is this flow, does it make sense to you? Giving your collaborators, setting them up well to give feedback. You're not, like, the best way to get good feedback is to ask good questions, I found. After that process of gathering feedback, I incorporate that into a nicer design, incorporating imagery and design elements based on kind of the look and feel that we're going with. And then I incorporate feedback again on that. And then there's usually several iterations of before getting to the final product. But it's, as you can see, it's a very organic process. It varies differently depending on who I'm working with, but that's the general order of steps. Oh, I forgot. Yeah, reflecting on the initial goals. That's also very key. So going back to the beginning and reminding ourselves, myself, the collaborators, what is it we were trying to convey, and does this end product actually reflect or resonate with that? This is an example of where I start from in many of my processes. So I've, for the past few years, worked with a group of students from the Aero Food Institute, as well as scholars from the HQP program. And this is part of the course that they take, a graduate course. At the beginning of the course, they are put into groups and they are partnered with a community organization, government organization, some sort of partner. And that's in the fall semester. And then throughout the fall and winter, they work with that community partner to solve a research problem. And in the past, I have come in then at the end of the course or near the end of the course in the spring, and I work with each group of students to visualize their research story. And this is all research that I'm not familiar with, I haven't been part of doing, so we spend a lot of time talking about the story of it. And for each project, I would produce a sketch like this to start after that initial conversation. And then through much back and forth and iterations, we land at the final product. So the students or groups of people that I'm working with along the way, they get to see all of the sketches, they get to have a say in where things go and why, and then hopefully it leads to producing a product that everyone is very happy with. And Hope, I will turn it over to you, and I will do the animations for you as you're speaking.
Well, I guess I don't have too much to add, honestly. I think I learned a lot of the process from Alex, so that's how I came to develop it. But yeah, same similar thing. Getting to know what you're talking about, coming up with ideas for concepts before landing on one, as I mentioned earlier. I don't even know what's in this list, but I guess I'll
just put it all up and then you can speak
okay,
to
that's good. Yeah, drawing it all out for yourself just to see, adding text where it's important, adding images later, and getting feedback at all stages. I think all of this is really a reiterative circular process often. It's not that I hammer out the text, then I hammer out the images, and then it all gets done and handed to whatever researcher or to my supervisor. It's more that I work in stages often, and you get feedback on one thing, incorporate that, go to the next thing, incorporate feedback on that, and that's how you go along. And then finally, when I know that mostly the image is good, then I can add titles, headings, fonts, any kind of more designy things that will help it just look polished and complete. And then finally, I think it says end with a second set of eyes, because even if I think it's done, it's really not done until we get something that resonates with both sides of the equation. So
thanks, Hope. So yeah, I think if it wasn't clear, but I think both of these processes are reflective of collaborative approaches to infographic design. So depending on what all of you who are in attendance today or watching this recording or listening to it, that might be reflective of your experience or approach, or it might not be. And if it's not, then hopefully there's things you can take from it that will be helpful. I think, like, for me, the kind of key thing is just letting things not be perfect, letting yourself be messy at the beginning, and just getting treating it as a visual story, again, going back to the beginning and just getting in that mindset. Yeah, so those are examples of processes that have worked and have, for me, has been constantly evolving with each project I do. So don't feel that you have to follow that exactly, but be inspired and make it your own. Now moving into talking about design specifically. So we talked about the process of design, but when you're actually like designing something, what are some things to consider? First, we're going to move through some basic design principles. And these are just a few, I should say, few considerations. They're not reflective of the entire slew of considerations that are out there in terms of design and infographics. That's where the resource list at the end will definitely come in handy. So you can kind of pick and choose and tailor your approach based on, again, key audience, key message. So back to this, basic design principles. Another consideration, balancing text with visuals, choosing the right format for your data and information, making designs accessible. I saw there was a comment in the chat earlier. I should say, I'll say this later, but I'll say it now. I am not an accessibility professional. I am similar to, I'm not a design professional, whatever, very much a learner. We'll go through some kind of overarching considerations for accessibility and where to start in terms of learning. And I'll just emphasize that it's a really, really important consideration. and there are so many things to learn about it. And then Hope's going to share a little bit more at the end about finding and creating the right tone through design. So first, basic design principles. You don't need any extensive design experience to design an infographic, but understanding some of the principles and rationale behind why certain things work and why they don't will help you make design decisions for yourself. I often find myself having like gut reactions to something. Like a design, I'll feel that, yes, this works, or yes, this doesn't. But if I don't spend time asking myself why, then I won't actually, like, it won't actually resonate, and I won't be able to communicate why I made a certain decision. So if I'm sharing an infographic with someone that I made and they'll ask me why I put something there, I won't be able to explain it. And like, that's where I know that I need to do more work. So by applying some of these design principles thoughtfully, infographics can become more powerful and more memorable storytelling tools, and you'll also feel more confident as you're creating them. So first, just to go through some practical examples of like how to apply these design principles, I'm sharing another example that I've done in the past. This one is an infographic on Arctic Indigenous health flourishing. And I'll start with talking about contrast. So contrast creates visual excitement. So I know, very exciting image. And can be created through many different means. So shape, color, size, texture. In this example, I mean, you can probably all identify forms of contrast here. Some of the easier ones are the dark drum, in contrast to the whiter, lighter figures on the side, to hopefully help to separate and group the information, and also contrast in style too. Like I like this, and in other examples that both Hope and I have shared, we tend to take a more illustrative style to the visuals, and then depending on the nature of the infographic, having a more like computerized or typewritten version of the information itself to kind of balance the playfulness of the illustrations too. So that's a form of contrast. Proximity is another design principle that can create visual unity in a design and can be used to group similar elements and identify themes. So here, I would say proximity could be understood through the concentric circles in the drum. So the elements that are closer together or in the same circles are related. Those are the themes. Similar to proximity, the space between elements can also be used to help groups or separate information to create themes or understandings. So here, the largest circle surrounding the drum, so the lands, waters, animals, plants, that one, those are the overarching themes of Arctic Indigenous health flourishing. And as you go down in size, the concentric circles, the relationship between those different elements and the larger theme is hopefully demonstrated. So these components in the middle of the gender expression, nourishing, accessible, and preferred foods, learning and doing, all of those are contingent on or dependent on this larger piece of lands, waters, animals, plants, and stars, and how people relate to those. Balance, I already kind of mentioned it with contrast, and you probably get the sense when talking about proximity and space. Balance is created, I think, my understanding of it, through applying those other principles. You're creating a structure, you're creating harmony, clear visual or written counterpoints to create a balance in an image. And that can both be for aesthetic purposes, but also for understanding purposes. Repetition is another principle of design that can establish consistency and a flow of information. So here, repetition, each figure here represents a different Indigenous group in the North, and they're all holding a stick to beat the drum with that says self-determination and sovereignty. And each drumstick says the same words. That's repetition to show that across multiple different groups, self-determination and sovereignty is essential for Arctic Indigenous health flourishing. Finally, alignment can help to create visual connections and patterns of information. We're often used to linear flows of information. So reading from, in a Western context, left to right, up to down. Those are important things to consider when putting together an infographic, like what's the natural flow of information if you're going with that linear flow. If you're going with a nonlinear style, such as this one, thinking about how you're going to apply those other design principles to help establish alignment or flow. So using contrast to separate the different pieces, and then also maybe to show where you want people to start with. So by having like the darker circle of the drum, like the darkest component of the piece, hopefully that's where people's eyes are drawn first. Next, balancing text with visuals. This is really important for infographics because they involve both. And with both, asking yourself, what can visuals do that words can't? And also, when is text and content needed to situate or provide framing for visual? They're part and parcel. They should work together to communicate your key message, and they each bring strengths. Text brings things that visuals can do. Visuals can bring things that text can't do. And together they can be much more powerful. So another shout out to Valerie. These are some examples that she has shared in previous workshops. This is an example of too much text. This is not, in my opinion, an infographic. It's a pretty list, and or a nicely formatted table. There's not really much work that's done to process that data or information. It's just listed it out. Conversely, there's a lot of text here, but there's not a lot of like meaningful text. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of visual representations of things, but I don't know what it's representing at first glance. What's the key message? I don't know. Some headings might have been helpful here. An arrow, pathway, flow of information, some contrast might have been nice in terms of background. But yeah, like this is just an example of you don't want to lean too far into one or the other. Finding that good happy medium of both takes time to get to, but that's the kind of the ultimate goal. Another consideration, number 3, is choosing the right format for your data. Some charts or graphics work better than others, depending on what you want to share or communicate. You want to focus on the story over the details. So it might not be the most like statistically specific, accurate chart or data, but it's a summary of the data or something like that. It tells a story. It's also important to remember that not all data are numbers. Considering like a process, like Hope was talking about earlier, hierarchies, Venn diagrams to show commonalities and differences, start and stop signs. I'm also thinking of the example Hope showed of the stop signs in that process flow. Yeah, those are all forms of data, and they don't necessarily need a quantitative chart to be communicated. Visualizations should ultimately help your audience interpret the meaning of the data, not just the numbers, or as I said, not all data are numbers. You just don't want to make your audience work. You want to help present data in a format that is easy to absorb and use. Again, thank you, Valerie. This was an excellent flowchart or an infographic to help understand or prepare you to design an infographic. And this one specifically helps you to determine like what kind of chart to use and when, what kinds of questions to ask. Certain charts will have different strengths. So a bar chart is helpful for showing comparisons. For example, a pie chart is helpful to show percentages of a whole. A line graph can show changes over time. Hierarchies or tree diagrams can show relationships between different variables, etc., etc. They're all, it's important just to, whatever you do, do it intentionally and go back to your data and ask what the story is that you're trying to tell. Another important consideration is that not all data are quantitative. Like I said, not all data are numbers, but this is specifically a representation of qualitative research that I did in partnership with Vanessa Cunningham, who did her master's at Guelph, focusing on post-secondary student food insecurity. You'll see there's a lot of text here, so probably not the greatest example in terms of balancing text and visuals, but in this case, it was essential to include the quotes and the voices of the interviewees that Vanessa spoke with through her research. So we organized it in a way that would hopefully not be too intimidating. So we worked to identify those key themes along the right-hand side, and then pull examples from the interviews that reinforce those themes. And that's in the speech bubbles in the middle. And you'll see along the left, or like not very clearly, but each illustration of the people is meant to represent an aggregate or composite identity of the interviewees who spoke to that specific theme. So as not to be identifying in the process, but to show here are the different identities of this type of student or person who spoke to this theme. And then the Venn diagrams behind those people showcased the components of their identities. So the top one, international PhD student, visibly racialized, and is also a parent. And that was kind of in that category of that theme, and so on and so forth. So again, different ways of using visuals to share information, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, is important. So now accessibility, this is not going to be a crash course in accessibility because I am, again, very much a learner as well. It's a huge topic and one that I am continuously trying to improve and find promising practices on. Obviously, ability and disability is a central consideration for accessible designs. And there are also many other factors to consider that can help make your infographics as accessible as possible. So these include balancing your text to graphics ratio, like we mentioned earlier. That's a consideration. You want to have a flow of ideas that makes sense, that's logical. So here, as the list, you can see it, your eyes jump around, it doesn't really make sense. Cluttered, you don't want to be cluttered. Less is more. Also, blank spaces in designs aren't the way to go. You don't want to, it creates tension or too much openness. Like you want to find a good balance there. Consideration is the justification of text if you're using like a computer to type out your text. Fully justified blocks of text are often the least accessible because it creates unnecessary blanks and gaps in the sentences that makes it hard for screen readers to pick up. So left justified is the way to go, as far as I know, again, at this point. Also, text too big. So for example, this large number I've put here, it's a design, it's an aesthetic decision. It doesn't really make sense to have that super big, but maybe an example of something that could be improved on. Clashing colors within your design or not enough contrast in your colors. There are web tools you can use to test out the contrast of colors, and it will let you know whether or not your design passes accessibility checks. And I believe those are included in our list of resources. If not, I will share those after the fact. Having too many different fonts or illegible fonts is not great for accessibility. Sticking with simple is usually better. It also helps with the longevity of the aesthetic appeal of your design, I find. Again, aesthetics should be a afterthought, or not an afterthought, but the message, the story should be first and foremost your priority. But fonts go out of style, and keeping kind of simple and basic is usually a good way to go, in my opinion, at least. Also emphasizing too many things, as Hope and I have talked about, having too many messages, too many things going on in your design, not a good strategy in terms of making your designs accessible. When thinking about accessibility, think about ways you can make your infographic improve comprehension, enhance engagement, as well as build trust and respect. There are many different ways and tools and resources to get there, but this is kind of that guiding message or goal that you should be reaching towards. I thought this would be a good example of different kinds of accessibility considerations. This is an infographic developed by the amazing team at Pixels and Plans. I've linked to their website on this slide here, but definitely check them out. They do really, really cool work in terms of data visualization. This infographic was developed in partnership with Limestone Analytics, and on their website, they described the project as, or the need for an accessible design as once in a while, clients pose challenges that initiate an exciting approach to existing design methodologies. So in other words, a challenge. In this case, for this infographic, all of the design components had to be done in black and white because the resulting infographics would be shared in regions where colored ink was not readily available. So using only 2 shades was essential and ended up not being a limitation, but an opportunity to experiment with minimal design and focusing on that larger story. So again, accessibility comes in many forms. Think about your target audience, your message, and how you can make that as accessible as possible to them. So Hope, over to you.
Yeah, my bit is it's about aesthetics, actually. I know that that's secondary, but it's definitely something to think about because aesthetics help portray something to your audience. And so I'm calling that tone, just in the general sense. You can put the black box up there because I'm not sure what I said there. But yeah, I think finding and creating the right tone with the kind of stuff you create is really important when you're assessing your work throughout the process. This is something that I think about a lot because, as you saw, mine and perhaps Alex's, both of our styles tend to be sort of illustrated, colorful and whatnot. And for me personally, a challenge is keeping my work from becoming too informal or too childish, I guess. So that's something I'm constantly thinking about, like, is this mature enough, polished enough, at the standard which the audience is expecting to see. So like I said, style or mood is similar to tone in writing. And that's more than just the text that you write in your infographics. It's stuff like what images you chose to say, what drawings you're choosing, if you're trying to go with drawings or pictures or whatever. What font are you going with? What color choices are you using? Shapes, symbols, what even layout, and all those kind of factors to consider are sometimes hard to know the right answer about, but a good hint for you and for myself is kind of knowing what my audience is and what they're expecting. Like, am I gonna make something that's gonna be going to younger children, students, business, people within the university context, people without, people with expert knowledge, people without, and what are they expecting to see? What is the kind of media that they see? And what's the standard of professionalism or fun art are they used to seeing or not seeing? And so that can kind of guide you to your own stuff. And the second thing I wanted to say about it was something that Alex had mentioned at the beginning, where when we're simplifying a message, we're not dumbing down the information. We're just trying to make it accessible, approachable, maybe even fun, all that stuff. And so I find that tone comes into play there because you want to do respect by your audience and, think of them as mature listeners, and you want to do respect by the information and think of that as expert and, almost sacred. So you don't want to, give too simplified information paired with childish texts. I'm sure I'm rambling at this point, but that's what I'm trying to say is, balancing that out to do justice to the knowledge that you're sharing and to the audience who's going to read it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, hope that wasn't rambling. It was all very important. I know that feedback I've gotten in the past too, again, on that note of like the more illustrative approaches, is like, I want it to be like less folksy academic and more professional. And I'm like, well, I am kind of a folksy academic. So anyway, it's all about finding that right tone and then being humble about asking for and receiving feedback to refine that, to communicate. All right. So reminders. That was a lot of information. Essentially, we want to reinforce that there's no one right way to design an infographic to do knowledge mobilization. You want to put yourself in your audience's place, simplify but maintain accuracy, as Hope reiterated. And then also remember that inspiration can come from anywhere. Sometimes taking a break and not looking at a screen or the material you're working with can be helpful in just like thinking about other ways of understanding and communicating. So with all of this in mind, I know we only have about 10-ish minutes left. We thought we could review some infographics together, but we can also use this as a time for you to ask questions about approaches and processes, etc. So with that, I'd like to share an example from Mona Chalabi, one of my favorite data visualizers. In the chat, I guess it would be easiest to do this in the chat, but if you'd like to speak, then just raise your hand and we can call on you. What is the key message here, do you think?
Employee turnover?
Employee turnover, yeah, that's what I got too. Yeah, high employee turnover. In the description online or on Mona's Instagram that I found, she discussed how the message was to demonstrate high turnover in low wage jobs in particular. And her intention was also to show that another story, one where machines are replacing people, because she focused on cashiers in particular. As she was engaging with the data, she started noticing that it was often the lower wage roles that were most vulnerable to automation and thus turnover. The top of the list were cashiers, which was a really concerning trend because I think it was 3.3 million people in the US work as cashiers, and most of them identify as women. Mona also went on to say, and I agree with this too, is just not sure if this was the best design to do it, because there are more bodies falling out of the bucket than falling into it, but that's not really clear from first glance because there's just so many of them, and you don't really get a sense of like what where there are more people. So it's hard to see that flow there. So that's maybe how I would improve this design, as well as if you want that key message to show that there are more people leaving than entering, then somehow displaying that in a visual way would be important. And yeah, Valerie, I do like the chaotic and scrambled feeling, because it does feel like it's creating sort of tension or frustration in like this concept that's happening, is that high turnover. And this is an example, again, from Pixels and Plans. It was part of a series of infographics for IDRC, International Development Research. I can't remember the acronym. Anyway, it might be hard to see because the text is small, but does anyone have any ideas of what the key messages might have been here with this infographic? importance of communication. Examples of research that have had positive, yeah, I know, I'm sorry, Cynthia, it's hard to read. It is emphasizing numbers of people impacted. But yeah, ultimately, I think like what I'm seeing in the chat, illustrating how research can inspire and inform change is what they were going for here. There, as I mentioned, this was part of a series of infographics, which I haven't displayed the whole series here, but this is the one that contains like that overarching program information and highlights. And then they had several smaller ones at the thematic and like country level. I liked the contrast, the organization of ideas. I think, like, again, because this wasn't a great way of sharing the infographic, if maybe the text was bigger, it would have been clearer, but maybe getting that key message across more boldly. I also think if we're talking about research transforming challenges into positive change, perhaps making the change side of the infographic bolder or more prominent than the challenge side to show that like this is what we're focusing on might have been a good strategy there too to help communicate that. But again, like I think it's great, and there are likely decisions that went into making it look this way. And Valerie, these are some examples from your workshop as well that I thought were great and would like to share. This one, any ideas around key messages or things you like about it, things that you would change, feel free to pop those in the chat and we can discuss them. Oh, thanks, Valerie, for that link. Titles as common questions. Yeah, hope. That question response style I tend to really like in an infographic or way of communicating. It treats it more as like a conversation between the person who is absorbing or engaging with the design and the person who's creating it. It seems to be pretty clear that the target audience is like caregivers of children, and how to and the importance of eating fish. It's pretty prominent at the top. I think like when I'm thinking about critiquing an infographic, I think about applying those design principles. Yes, Valerie, the portion sizes on the palm are really memorable and practical, and like someone can look at their palm and see like the sizes there. But you're right, like as I was starting to get at too, that the contrast between the colors of the fish and the palm are not very clear. So making that more apparent might be more helpful in terms of that looks like it's one of the main messages there, or like a tool, an action that people can use. So how to make that more prominent and more accessible, it would be a good way to go. We also have more from Valerie. Any thoughts, ideas, questions about the key message of this one? I think in terms of contrast, they've done a good job at making, the headings bold against a lighter background. They've used shapes and as ways to help the information flow. So the title at the top, and then moving kind of down onto the right-hand side for the map and downwards. That's kind of where my eye goes first, and then I go to the different details around it. I know we only have 2 minutes left, so I'll whip through. I won't spend any more time on the next examples, but they will be shared in the slides afterwards, so you can kind of refer back and assess them to your own, to the extent to which you wish to do. Okay, key takeaways. We hope you've learned more about promising practices for designing, engaging, and visually appealing infographics. If you already knew, regardless of your familiarity with them, I hope you've learned a little bit more and about how to apply them for your own work. Essentially, infographics, they are a helpful tool for facilitating engagement, part of larger knowledge mobilization strategies. It's important to identify a clear message and a target audience. And for me, developing infographics is easier and more effective when the whole process is premised on strong relationships with the material, with audiences, with collaborators. Hope, anything to add to key takeaways?
No, just to thank you on behalf of everybody for making this. Yeah.
Before we fully close out, this is a reminder about the Infographics in Practice program for University of Guelph graduate students. There's more information online at uoguel.ph/infographic-practice. And we also wanted to remind all of you that if you know someone else who would like to join the program, but they aren't at this workshop, we'll make the recording available to them this week to listen and still join. So just reach out to one of the organizers and we'll make sure that they get that recording. So again, for more information, check out that website online. And we look forward to learning about the artful stories that you will tell with infographics. These slides, again, will be shared with all of you at the end, but this is not an extensive, but starting list of some resources for design in particular. Some modules from Coursera that don't take too long and help to reinforce and can dive deeper into some of the topics that Hope and I discussed today that we didn't have enough time to dive directly into. Also resources for specific graphic design programs. So I know that there was a question in the chat earlier about what we use. There are lots of free tools and programs available, and I believe all the ones listed here are either free or part of being a student or employee somewhere. And there's also a list of places to look for fair use images and some tips and tricks for Google searching to find those as well. So with that, I think we're a little bit over time. If you do have any questions, please connect with us via email. I don't want to speak for Hope, I always love chatting about design and knowledge mobilization and how to do it and how to do it better. So yeah, be in touch. I look forward to connecting with many of you. And maybe Valerie, I'll turn it over to you to do a closing, if that's okay.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, both Alex and Hope. That was a really great session, and I loved all the conversations we had in the chat. And yeah, just one final plug for the Infographics in Practice program. It's modeled almost like it would be a competition, but we're just taking the competitive edge out of it. We just want to tell cool stories in cool ways. And support kind of the visual aspect of that. So if you have any questions about that program, about this session, or if you just want to chat infographics, feel free to reach out to anyone on the organizing team, or click that link in the uoguel.ph/infographpractice, and you can find our contact information. But with that, if anyone wants to stick around and answer a couple questions, and have a little bit of a Q&A, I'm happy to stick around for that. But otherwise, thank you all so much for being here, and maybe see you in the recording. Otherwise, maybe see you in a future Skills for Research Impact session.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, and I'll stick around too for anyone who wants to chat now.
Well, Alex, I'm curious to hear your thought on the question that's in the chat anyway. I'm not sure if Cynthia from Mapra is still in here, but
How appropriate? I my answer as an artist would be like all art is kind of stealing. It all comes from somewhere. I think it's all part of building um, building a relationship with the material and understanding, like if someone does a really good job of communicating something in a certain way, yeah, taking inspiration from that is great. And if it's more of a, like similar to if you're writing a paper or report, referencing where you got the ideas from. I borrowed a lot from Valerie in this presentation, and I tried my very best to acknowledge every time that I did, but I wasn't perfect at it. But yeah, I definitely learned a lot through other people. But yeah, this style of infographics, I would say it's not stealing. Just cite your sources when appropriate, and I'm sure it's just a constant evolution of like learning how to do this and do it better. So yeah.
Yeah, and full disclosure, I borrowed lessons that I've learned along the way to make that presentation that you then borrowed. So like everything is kind of generational in a sense. And the only other thing I'd add to your response, Alex, is just because something looks really cool in someone else's example doesn't mean it's going to serve your audience the best. So, or likewise, perhaps something completely separate from what you think would be a logical dot to connect for your own infographic design. Just kind of take into consideration what's going to serve your audience best. If it's something that looks super different or something that is about something very different, but presented in a way that's going to be very useful for you. The whole world is your inspiration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point too. I should have mentioned that when I was talking about resources, but because sometimes like a lot of those programs like Canva and Pictochart, whatever, they'll have templates that you can work with, which can at first glance look really cool and like, oh, that's perfect. But then when I actually get to start designing, I'm like, oh, that actually doesn't really feel right, or that flow is very different. So that's where I think like starting with a sketch or not looking at too much inspiration. Too much inspiration can be a bad thing sometimes too. So yeah, just echoing everything Valerie just said. Thanks for your questions, Cynthia.
If there's any other questions, feel free to type them into the chat or unmute. I'm happy to stick around a little bit more, but I also don't want to force anyone to be here if they're just kind of looking for a quiet way to sign out without it being super obvious. So
I just want to say thanks so much. I learned a lot from this, and I'm excited to work on some of my own infographics. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Sam. It was great to meet you, and I look forward to, I'm sure there'll be lots of future collaborations for all of us. So yeah.
Yes, I think so. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for coming, Sam.
Bye.
And then Hope, you're amazing. I feel like I'm learning so much from you too, and thank you for doing this with me. And are you still in Scotland?
Yes, yeah. I'm gonna
Yeah.
have dinner after this.
I was gonna say you're probably very tired.
Yes, but it was fun. I really enjoyed it, and I was giving a different workshop on a different thing to my next cohort of my students, and I was like, oh my gosh, I need to stop sounding so wooey in my information I give. I told them to take a walk instead of writing and just meditate on their information. So I'm trying to be practical. Yeah, but it was really fun. Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot. And thanks for facilitating it, Valerie. It's really, the base you gave us was really good.
Yeah,
anytime.
So grateful for this opportunity, and yeah, I hope that we get lots of people in the program and lots of infographics to share. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited about it.
Me too.
But I think there's just us and an AI bot left. So
amazing.
Super fair. Yep.
I think we've answered all the questions.
I know. I wish
Fun.
I should have practiced that earlier. I wanted it to be a little bit more interactive, but so it goes. Next time.
I think there was enough
I mean-
interesting content that people were engaged anyway. It didn't. I was not bored.
Well, in some of our past sessions, it's been like, okay, share your thoughts in the chat. Radio silence, and we're like,
Mhm.
okay, moving on.
Yeah.
At least we had a few
Mhm.
few takers there.
Yes, absolutely.
Mhm.
Well, I hope you both.
Thank you both so much.
I hope we get to see you in person soon, sometime, Valerie. After all this virtual interaction, but yeah, have a great rest of your day, and hope when you're back in Guelph, let me know.
Yeah. I'll be at the office. You'll see me first thing.
Well,
I'll log
see you
off
both
then. Bye,
later.
everybody. Good
Bye.
job. Good job, Alex.
Thank you. You
Bye.
too.
Bye.